Rob Fitz, welcome to the Bookshelf Conversation.
Thanks so much, Ron.
I found out about your book. You are probably one of the leading American experts on Japanese baseball. This has been a passion for you for several years. You have several excellent books on the subject. Uh, why did you decide to come up with this one?
My new one, Illustrated Introduction to Japanese Baseball Cards. Well, I published a history book this year called Issei Baseball. It's about early Japanese American baseball, and that came out in April. And I was planning a large and long West Coast book tour,
Uh,
but then the virus hit,
uh,
right? And I was stuck at home, and with a lot of time on my hands because I had set aside several months for marketing, for doing book signings, and for traveling around the country to promote my book. Um, so when I was thinking about what to do, a eBay client of mine said, "Hey, many years ago, you had this little pamphlet called An Introduction to Japanese Baseball Cards, where you talk about the different types of cards. Do you still have any of those left?" And that first pamphlet was just a pamphlet. It was something I printed up on my computer. Anytime somebody ordered it, it was just $1 or two. I would print it out, having to change the pages and flip them over each time, staple it together and send it out. And I looked into that and I said, the technology has advanced so much. Why don't I try doing my first ebook? And so I came up with an ebook, and right away people said, "Hey, this looks great, but I'd love a paperback copy." I thought, oh boy, that's more than I had kind of signed on for. But then I spent a few days on the internet. I found plenty of printers that you could, put in your PDF and they'd print you the book, and then a week later it would come. And I found one that did a magnificent job. So the book is all color, glossy pages. They just did a beautiful job. And so now I have a brand new paperback book.
it's quite like it's a great introduction. Uh, One of the things I noticed is right away, and I'm sure you're familiar. I'm going to hold up this book. I'm sure you're familiar with this one,
Yep, my name's on the back cover.
and indeed it is. And one of the things I notice in comparing Japanese baseball cards with American baseball cards is the artistry involved. I mean, basically, American baseball cards, and I'm not talking about the ones back in the 19th century, uh, the ones that were drawn by artists, but most of the American baseball cards are photographs,
Right.
whereas a lot of the Japanese baseball cards are beautifully artistic renderings in multiple forms, not just the 2+ by 3+, whatever the dimensions are for the standard American baseball card. Is that a cultural thing, or are Japanese just more artistically inclined than Americans?
Oh wow, it's a tough question, right? um, I think it's a cultural thing in that is my belief that a lot of the techniques and artistry of the woodblock prints went into the baseball cards. I don't have anything to prove that, but when you look at the art of the woodblock prints and you look at the baseball cards from the 1930s and 40s and very early 50s, there's a lot of similarities. So I think the woodblock prints inspired a lot of the baseball cards, and that's one of the reasons you see such wonderful use of color, and especially the primary colors on these cards. They did also have photograph cards in Japan, but they pale by comparison to the truly art ones.
Another thing that stands out are the shapes of these cards. I mean, you have round cards. Uh, I found it amusing that differences, besides the way kids play with cards, the flipping of the cards is was done over there as it is here. Talk about what is Menko, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. What is
You're
Menko?
pronouncing it absolutely right, and I'm hoping we're going to get to that with some illustrations in a little bit. But I'll start now, and then we'll show the illustrations later. Menko is a flipping game. It started probably in the 18th century with clay discs that the kids would form a circle. One would throw his disc on the ground. and the others would throw a disc and try to flip the first one over. And if they flipped it over or maybe overlapped it, the rules would change from time you played to time you played. But if a player's Menko hit the first one, then they would get to keep both of them. And during the late 19th century, the discs and tin Menko changed to cardboard, and pretty soon they stopped being pretty much just boring discs, but started being very colorful depictions of whatever, flowers, animals, samurai, military heroes, and soon after baseball players.
I
So that
imagine,
game is, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, imagine changing the format from to very lighter cardboard made it difficult to actually physically flip the card over.
Probably, yes. So some of the early Menkos are very thick, actually.
Mhm.
The cardboard is pretty darn thick. And then they do get thinner and thinner as I think they might have become more and more collectibles through time.
So why don't you show us a few examples of these things, please?
All right. All right, let's see if we can get it all to work, right?
And this is a flying by the seat of your pants production. So
Yeah. Yep. So right now, do you see only the picture or do you see my other slides?
I see the picture of the cover of your book.
Great. All right, so there's the picture of my cover of my book.
Okay, okay, continue, and then we'll, because I'm sure we'll get back to it. So it's something I wanted to ask about.
Okay, we can talk about that. Okay. So here is a 19th century woodblock print of two boys playing Menko. You can see the one about to throw one down and try to knock the one that's already on the ground. This is one of the earlier Menkos, probably relating to the late 19th century or very early 20th century. You see school kids dressed up one's wearing a school uniform, black and white, like a lot of the early Menkos. But they don't have to be round. There's also square, rectangular, and even we'll see some die cut Menkos in a little bit from an early time period.
Now, excuse me for asking, but this is something that I should know, but I don't. What is die cut?
So die cut is a process basically where something is printed and then a machine that's kind of like a giant cookie cutter comes down and hits the piece of paper and then cuts it into shapes.
All right.
So here we have some Menko probably dating to the 30s. This one dates to about 1930. You can see what I mean about the influence of the woodblock prints here. The colors are they're very bold. They're kind of basic, a lot like the prints. Some more Menko from the 30s. Once again, they can be rectangular. At this time, there was no professional baseball in Japan, so the Menko showed college players for the most part.
And we should probably talk a little bit about how baseball actually came to Japan in the first place.
Sure. So baseball comes, we believe, in 1872. There's some American teachers that come over right after the Meiji Restoration to teach in the Japanese schools. And one of them is named Horace Wilson. He's a huge baseball fan. And the myth, story, it can't be proven, is that in 1872, he was frustrated by his students' lack of physical education. So he brought out his baseball bat and his ball and he taught them the game. And it actually caught on very quickly in the schools of Tokyo and also Kobe as well in the 1870s. Now here's a die-cut Menko, this umpire here.
Now, again,
So
this is like an unusual shape that certainly I doubt I've ever seen anything in the United States to compare with that.
Absolutely. And the one on it's my left. I don't know what, I guess you
And my
probably
left
also.
too.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure it was reversed. This is known as a bookmark Menko because it's about in length and about 1.5 inches wide. And I just like the way they look. So, but not all Menko were drawings. As you can see here, here's some ones from the early 1930s that are based on photographs. Some of
What,
these I'm sorry, some of these are what they call bromides. You see the one with the glove and the one with the guy with the bats. These are
mhm.
actually photographs with blank backs that are sold kind of as memorabilia or collectibles. So, and they're known as bromides rather than Menko because they weren't part of the Menko game.
So let's talk briefly about that. How were these cards made available to the public?
We'll see some examples in a little bit, but basically your Menko were either sold in a toy store in sheets or already cut out and bound up by a string. And your bromides could have been sold in a number of ways. You could have bought them at the ballpark. Um, some of them actually came in packs made out of newspaper, where you take an old newspaper and you would cut it down the right size. You'd seal the sides with glue, stick the bromide in, and for a yen or two, you could buy a pack, just the same as we do buying US cards.
And again, this is pre-professional days. So these are college players.
These are college players you're seeing here. That's correct. These all date to the very early 1930s. Now, as you probably all know, in 1934, Babe Ruth comes to Japan with the American All-Star team, and they had their own cards. No really attractive Menko that we've seen, but they have bromide sets. We're guessing that most of these might have been sold around the ballparks or sold in stores that were helping to make money off the tours, or department stores that had giveaway of Babe Ruth baseball cards during the tour, for example. And also in the pre-war times, a big way to collect baseball cards was through postcards. As you can see, the postcards could also be really colorful, very artistic. There are other ones that are just plain black and white photos of specific games. So if you're a Japanese baseball card collector and you want to get a card of a certain player dating before 1930, you're pretty much going to have to get a postcard of that player.
Looking back at that Babe Ruth card, how much is something like that worth?
That's a great question because there's so few of them out there. Let me see if I can go back. I can. Um, this card here, there's only a couple, two, we'll call it several known to exist. So what is the worth? They've never been up for auction. Um, we're not talking about the serious money like the Honus Wagner card because it's not really well known by collectors. Most American collectors aren't terribly excited by Japanese cards yet.
Hmm.
Obviously, I hope to change that. But yeah, this Babe Ruth card here is far rarer than the Honus Wagner card, or
Is
far
that his
rarer than
actual
the.
signature?
No, it's not. This was actually one of a set. There was a set, I think there were 8. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Babe Ruth cards in this set. And they all show him in his 1934 uniform. So when we get to after the war, you see what I consider the real golden age of Japanese baseball cards is 1948 through about 1951-52. It's during the American occupation. Um, the Allies purposely used baseball to help rebuild Japanese morale and also to forge ties between the US and Japan because it was a shared love of baseball. So the stadiums were rebuilt very quickly. The leagues were started right away. 1946, they restarted. So some of the best cards, I think, come from this era. I'll just show you some examples. If you want me to stop and talk about them, I'll be happy to. This is
And
one of my favorite cards.
the dimensions of these cards.
So these cards I'm showing you right now would be about an inch in width and about 2 to 2.5 inches in length. Maybe a little bit wide, or maybe 1.5 inches in width. So sometimes they would be sold in little sheets like this, and then kids would take scissors to cut out the individual players.
This is a beautiful card.
Aren't they? Isn't that wonderful? Yeah, this is an oversized card of a fellow named Nishizawa, who was an all-star first baseman in the 40s and early 50s.
What's with the red lips?
Ah, artistic license.
And these are professionals now?
Now we're into professionals. Now there are very few college cards from the late 1940s onwards. Now this guy is Victor Starfin. Victor Starfin was born in Russia. His family escaped during the revolution and they ended up settling in Japan, where Starfin came over as a kid. He learned baseball from his Japanese schoolmates and he soon became a high school star, eventually signing with the Yomiuri Tokyo Giants in the 1930s and played all the way to the late 1950s in Japan. And he's in the Hall of Fame as one of the top pitchers of the period.
Hmm.
We have another picture of Starfin here. This is what the backs looked like. So not only can you play the Menko game by flipping the cards, but there were also other games you could play. So you see the symbol up top. You can't see where I'm pointing, for the rock, paper, scissors game. So you could play rock, paper, scissors with your cards. The numbers were a variety of different number games that your kids would make up. And then the bottom has the team name and the name of the player. This is just an example of some of the attractive cards coming out of the late 40s and 50s.
And again, the shape is vastly different than what we're used to here.
Absolutely. So these are Menko, of course, used for flipping with the round shape.
How many companies were involved in production of baseball cards?
Really good question. We don't know. A lot of the cards don't have any manufacturing information on them. Um, and a lot of the sets were very small. They might have had 6 cards, a dozen cards. It's only a handful of sets from the late 40s that have over 50 cards in them. What we think is that they're probably regional, local printers who made them for the local toy shops. But we really don't know. There are some manufacturers that did put their information on the card, and they were big-time toy makers. This one is actually called a flying Menko. You see the 2 little notches on the side?
Mhm.
I believe you can put a rubber band on those and make them shoot across the room. So some Menko were sold in this way. You see this bundled together with string. They would come into the shop this way. What we don't know is whether the purchaser would buy the entire bundle or whether the shopkeeper would then clip the string and sell them individually.
This is a good shot because you can actually see the thickness of these things.
Correct. Yeah, these ones are pretty good. They're obviously the toys. They're made for toys as opposed to, saving unused. There's a nice die cut from the 48, 49. Now these die cuts from the late 40s are my favorite. I love them.
These are very cute.
Many different sets of these, several dozen sets at least.
Does this shape have its own name?
Not in Japanese that I'm aware of. Maybe it
Mhm.
does. We just call them die cut Menkos. Now this is my all-time favorite set. This is a mask. It measures, off the top of my head, maybe 8 inches tall by 6 inches wide. And you can see, if you look at the eyes and right around the eyes, you can see there are pre-punched areas. So you can punch out the eyes and you can see where a string attaches. So these are for kids to play with. You're out there playing stickball. And this is Tetsuhara Kawakami, the great Giants first baseman. member of the Hall of Fame. You want to be Kawakami when you're playing with your friends, you put on his mask.
I can't see how this did not come to the United States. You know,
I
kids
know,
could
isn't
be
it
Willie
crazy?
Mays, they could be Mickey Mantle, they could be Hank Aaron. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would have made a fortune doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they're wonderful. And the cards themselves are beautiful. They really
This,
are.
I've seen these airplane. These are fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, these are really collectible. There weren't a lot of airplane Menko made ever. They were always kind of rare. The sets, I think, might contain the biggest set, maybe only a half dozen cards. I think maybe even 3 or 4 cards. So they're hard to come by, period. And collectors love them.
Do these
So
actually fly?
I've never tried. I don't know.
Because I'm wondering, this it seems like a very random thing to do is to make a baseball player into an airplane.
You're absolutely right. And maybe that would explain why they're so hard to come by. Maybe you were supposed to attach a paper clip to it or something and shoot it with a rubber band. I
Mm.
don't know. That's a great question. This is a kite. It only
Wow.
measures, it's small. It measures like 7 by 7 inches. There's the back of it. So, starting also in the late 40s, you get dice playing games in Japan. And they usually followed the format of a colorful baseball card on front showing the player. And in the back are, just like Stratomatic, a statistically based baseball game where you would roll your dice and or pick a number um, and see what the results were. This is another game called Karuta. Um, These are some of the more attractive cards in Japan. They were a box set. I think the next slide shows, yeah. So they're a box set, and the name of the game is you would have a clue card, and then you would have a picture card, and you had to match them. And a lot of times it was played as a memory game where you would flip the picture cards over, so all you saw was their blank backs, and then you would get a clue card and you had to remember where the corresponding card was on the floor, and you would pick it up if you could get the right card.
Hmm.
Now, we talked a little bit about bromides before. So starting in the 40s and 50s, you really see a lot of these cards, and these are made for collectors. They're not game cards. They're on very thin paper or thin photo stock, showing actual photos of the players. All the cards here are of Wally Yonamine, who of course played for the 1 year for the San Francisco 49ers, played football, then became a minor league baseball player in the States before going to Japan and becoming a superstar outfielder with the Tokyo Giants. And American players visiting Japan were a big topic for bromides. Yogi Berra, of course, went over there. And here we have some of the tours, including Joe DiMaggio. And all right, I'm blanking on
Dom
DiMaggio,
DiMaggio.
on Dom, yeah.
Is
And
that
Bob,
Bobby Shantz in
it,
the pitcher?
it is Bobby Shantz, yes. So when you get in the late 50s, we start to change the shape of Menko, and they start to become a little bigger. These cards here are slightly bigger than tobacco cards, um, but once again, they're colorized photographs at this point and really attractive. The backs look similar to the Menkos of the late 40s. Variety of games that you could play with your friends, as well as flipping them. What the stock isn't is, to bring up your earlier question, the stock of these is not as thick. So it's obvious, I think, that throwing them down on the ground was not their primary use at this point. I think a lot of the other games were being used more commonly. So some of the Menko were sold this way. So here's what's called a taba. What you see in the middle are newspaper envelopes, each containing one card. They're strung together by a string, and this taba probably would have been hung from somewhere in the shop. You pay your money, and you reach up and you grab one of the envelopes and you pull down quickly, and it rips off in your hand, and you see what player you got.
And this was from about what year?
This one particular is 1962.
So compared with, I think, a pack of cards in the U.S. in those days cost a nickel for 5 cards. How does that compare with how these were sold?
We don't know.
Hmm.
I have not seen one with prices on them. Yeah. So some of these cards in the Taba were known as prize cards, and their back would have a rubber stamp on them. And if you won a prize card, you could go to the shop owner who had this display sheet here, and you could claim a prize. And the prizes were usually these uncut blocks of cards. You see some pairs down the bottom for third prize, some quads, 4 cards for the second prize, and the first prize isn't pictured here, but it's a full sheet of usually 16 uncut cards. So the kids would get this and they cut them up. So if you're a US collector and you're collecting Menko from the late 50s, early 60s, a lot of the cards you'll get will be hand cut with scissors because they'll be coming from these prize sheets. So they'll have real wavy borders. PSA, for example, calls all Menko hand cut because then they don't have to determine whether they came from the Taba and cut in the manufacturer or if a kid cut them.
So it seems as again, compared with the way we collect cards here, especially those who in the craze when the memorabilia was really worth something, they didn't pay as much attention to that kind of thing. These were not for collecting; they were for playing with.
Absolutely. It's not until much later that you start to get cards that are really for collectors. But I do want to point out that during the time that Menko were produced, there are other cards produced by, say, candy manufacturers, where the kids were definitely opening up the candy and saving the baseball card. And they were produced on really light stock, so they could be folded into the piece of candy wrapper. And so they would have been just for saving and collecting. So most people want to know about Sadahara O rookies. At the time, there were almost a dozen different manufacturers of Menko,
Wow.
and the sets did not include every player in the league. They would often be 40 players in the set, sometimes up to a whole 100 for the larger sets, and there would be multiple cards of the stars. This is a lot like a Gaudi set or even the tobacco card sets. Mostly focused on the star players. So these are looking, and I think they're all, unless I've made a mistake somewhere in there, they're all Sadahara O rookie cards. And this is probably only about a fifth of the different ones.
Were the players paid for their depictions on cards?
Pretty sure the answer is no. The cards contain no copyright information. I've asked Mashi Murakami, were you ever paid for baseball cards? And he'd said no. He usually didn't even know he had them of himself. And I've shown him cards and I'm like, hey, Mashi, have you seen this? He's like, no, where'd you get that? And I'd be like, oh, this is, I have to explain the cards to him, what was made when he was a young player. So I don't believe any of the players were paid at this point. Once I think you get to the 1970s, late 1960s, I think that probably changes.
Because Topps, I believe, used to pay a token of like $5 to a player for their image for their whole career. And
Yes.
I know a lot of the rookie players were just thrilled that they were actually on a baseball card because that proved they played the game. So they obviously weren't in it for the money or whatever token they could get, a radio, a set of golf clubs, something like that.
Yeah, the Topps did some brilliant marketing. My understanding is they would go and sign them from the minor leagues to these lifetime contracts for $5, and then they give out prizes, right? But they'd be making so much money on it because the prizes they get at wholesale. Topps was very wise when it came to the business sense. So also in this later period, this is early 1960s, late 50s, you start to get foreign players becoming more popular in Japan. And These guys are barely known in the United States. We got Jack Bloomfield up in the top, Joe Stanka, who played only a little bit of one season for the 1959 White Sox, and Chico Barbone, who was Cuban and never played in the major leagues. But they were all big stars in Japan.
I'm curious about how I know Americans had a tough enough time adjusting to the culture, but a Cuban player, what must that have been like?
Yeah, I think it always depends on the person, how adventuresome you are, how willing you are to try new things and put up with the Japanese discipline on the teams. Chico Barbone is an interesting story. Comes over in the 1950s, and he's still living in Japan today. He married a
Wow.
Japanese woman, has a Japanese family. I believe he still works in the front office of some teams. Maybe he's retired in the last few years. I'm not sure. I've never met him, but I've heard he's a really interesting fella.
Hmm.
This is one of the favorite cards I like to show off. This is a Larry Raines card, but we all know who that is. Jackie Robinson came over with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1956 as part of a tour, postseason tour. Larry Raines played for the Hankyu Braves, and this is a 1958 card for Larry Raines. It says up on the top, it says Hankyu number 8. And Wait a minute, am I reading this wrong? This is actually a Barbone. This is a Chico Barbone card, not Larry Raines, but it is an error card. I think I have to change that in my book.
Uh-oh.
We just found a typo, and we have several hundred from printed. So, uh-oh. So here we have 1962. We have Don Newcombe and Larry Doby. Each of them played the 62 season in Japan. Both of these cards are pretty darn rare. The Newcombe card we think might have been pulled from production because it's very difficult to find. The Doby card is still hard to find, but it seems to have been printed in the same numbers as the others in the set. And both these cards will go for hundreds of dollars if you're lucky enough to see one for sale.
Hmm.
By the time we hit 1968, we get the first, what we would, as Americans, consider like a modern baseball card. And that's with statistics in the back and a numbered set. This is a 68 Kabaya Leaf set. It's one of the more famous sets because it was brought over by American serviceman Mel Bailey in the 1960s and sold through trading card newsletters to Americans. And here we have O and Murakami, but you can read that. There's Sadahara O from the 1970s. This is a Calbee potato chips card. Calbee started manufacturing in 1973, started producing large sets of hundreds of cards, and in one case over, I believe, 1,400 cards in the
Wow.
1975/76 set. One card per pack of potato chips. Not too many people have completed that entire set. My all-time favorite Calbee set card. This is from 1977. It's a short print released, we believe, only in the Osaka area. Shows Owen Aaron during the 1974 Home Run Derby, which took place during the New York Mets tour of Japan.
Who won that derby?
Aaron won it. And these are examples of Calbee cards. We've got Frank Howard there from 1974. And through the years, the sizes change. Got Reggie Smith up there next to Frank Howard. Hideki Matsui, you could read that. Ichiro. Hiromitsu Ochiai won the Triple Crown a number of times. One of the best Japanese players of the 1980s. And you can see Otani up there if he's not blocked by our faces. He is on my screen. These are kind of some oddball cards. This came out in the 80s. I happen to pick Ochiai because he's one of my favorite players, just to show you the variations of what cards looked like in the 80s. And then in 1991, we have a big change in Japanese cards. A company called BBM, Baseball Magazine, produces a real modern set. There's about 400 cards in this set, numbered consecutively. It includes almost all the players who play professionally. They have stats and bios on the back. They're sold in wax packs, same as in the US, $2 per pack of 10. They produce factory sets. There's league leaders. There's nostalgic stars in the set. And BBM is producing many sets ever since. And so now modern Japanese cards, that's the back of one, same card actually. But modern Japanese cards are very similar to modern US cards. They're full of inserts, game use cards, autograph cards, and sold in the same way. And I think that's all we have.
That was a beautiful and illuminative presentation, Rob. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
You obviously enjoy this very much.
Yeah.
How many of these do you have in your own collection?
Almost all the cards we just saw are from my own collection. A few of the rare ones were borrowed from Robert Clevens of Prestige Collectibles. For people who are interested in Japanese cards, he holds an auction. I believe it's 3 or 4 times a year where all of us collectors eagerly await his offerings. So he's the guy to go to for the rare and beautiful cards. I've been collecting since I lived in Japan since 1993, and still collect today both US and Japanese cards.
Well, one of the things I noticed today, as opposed to when I was a kid, when I was a kid, it was Topps, that was it. Then around in the early 80s, we had other sets. I guess Topps lost some sort of lawsuit, and other companies were given permission to print baseball cards. And now I think Topps is still, I don't collect anymore other than like 1 pack a year just to say I have it. But even within Topps, there are so many permutations, and you pick up a copy of Beckett's baseball card guide, and it gets thicker and thicker every year because it has to accommodate all the new sets. And I wonder, especially since, I mean, I don't even know what a normal pack goes for these days. I'm guessing it's at least $3 for a pack of 5 or 10 cards. But this is obviously not something sustainable for younger kids to follow in their fathers and grandfathers' footsteps. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons that baseball is having trouble attracting a younger crowd.
I feel the same way. And unfortunately, the Japanese baseball industries followed the model of the modern Topps industry of producing so many sets, I can't keep up. And originally, I tried to buy 1 pack of each Japanese set, and there were so many of them. And of course, you have to get them from Japan and shipped over because I don't go to Japan every year. I just gave up. And so I've been wondering the same thing. What I understand is there's very few set collectors today. So a child would no longer try to complete a set. Instead, they're more likely to collect their favorite players. And that's one of the reasons there's so many different sets.
Mhm.
So, pick your player. In New York, it would probably be Aaron Judge. You'd want as many different Aaron Judge cards as you could get. So Topps prints, I don't know, 80, 100 different Aaron Judge cards per year.
That's amazing.
So you can keep looking and looking, and some of them are, these inserts they have. I sound like an old man here complaining. One of 100. It's very hard to collect them all, but for some people, that's the challenge. That's the love. So that's okay.
To each his own. We've been talking
Exactly.
with Rob Fitz, author of an illustrated introduction to Japanese baseball cards. Rob, thank you very much for talking with today. I'm not going to embarrass myself. Arigato.
Arigato gozaimasu. Yeah, I just blew that one too. My Japanese is pitiful. Thank you
Rob,
so
thank
much
you
for
very
having me.
much. Take care. Stay safe.
All right, you too.